Ethan's ship had been battered by the storm-like winds of the alien planet for hours. Lightning crackled across the violet sky, striking distant mountains with a deafening roar. He gripped the control panel as the ship shuddered violently. Sparks flew and alarms screamed. He tried to steady the vessel, but a sudden gust slammed the ship into a jagged cliff. Metal groaned and twisted, and then, with a final screech, the ship came to rest in a crater, half buried in rocky soil. Ethan sat for a long moment, chest heaving, ears ringing. The communication system was fried, and his supplies were limited. The storm continued outside, and the thick mist made it impossible to see very far. But survival came first. He unbuckled himself and assessed the damage. The hull was cracked in multiple places, and one engine had caught fire. Repairing the ship would take days, if not weeks, assuming he could find the materials. He stepped outside, the cold air immediately cutting through his thin jacket. The mist wrapped around him like a living creature, moving and twisting. As he searched for a safe place to set up camp, something unusual caught his eye. A faint glow under a collapsed rock formation nearby. He approached cautiously, senses alert. Underneath the rubble, he could see a small shape struggling. A soft melodic whimper reached him over the howling wind. Ethan's heart skipped a beat. The creature, he could only guess it was alive, was trapped under a large piece of debris. He dropped to his knees and examined the situation. The figure was small, clearly not human, with delicate limbs and skin that shimmered slightly under the dim light. "Hold still. I'll get you out," he said gently, although he didn't know if she could understand him. He searched the wreckage for something to lift the heavy stone. The metal hull of his ship had broken off pieces that he could use as levers. After several attempts, sweat dripping down his forehead, he managed to shift the debris just enough to free the small alien. The girl, or what looked like a girl, gasped. Pulling herself out from under the stone, she was no more than 10 or 12 in appearance, though her species might age differently. Her skin was pale with faint luminescent patterns that seemed to pulse in rhythm with her heartbeat. Her hair floated slightly as if in water, and her eyes, large and round, reflected a mixture of fear and curiosity. Ethan didn't have much time to observe. She had a deep cut along her arm, bleeding profusely. Without thinking, he tore a piece of his jacket and wrapped it around her wound. She flinched at first, then stayed still, allowing him to bind her arm. "You're safe now," Ethan whispered. "I won't let anything happen to you." She tilted her head, her large eyes scanning his face. Her lips moved, forming sounds he couldn't understand. He realized she was trying to speak, but language seemed impossible between them. Still, there was a sense of connection, a fragile understanding that danger had passed. The storm outside continued, but Ethan knew he had to move quickly. He lifted her carefully, placing her on his back. Every step was a challenge. The mist made it difficult to see, and the uneven terrain threatened to throw him off balance. Yet he pushed forward, driven by instinct more than anything else. Finally, he found a small cave partially shielded from the storm. He set her down gently, checking her injuries again. The cut on her arm was deep, and she had several bruises, but she was alive, and that was what mattered. He searched his pack for what he had. Some water rations, a basic first aid kit, and a few pieces of dried food. "Drink this," he said, offering a water pouch. She hesitated, but eventually drank, her eyes never leaving his face. There was trust forming there, fragile but real. Ethan felt a warmth in his chest, a protective instinct he hadn't realized he had. Hours passed. The storm finally began to die down, leaving a quiet, eerie calm. The girl remained silent, resting on a pile of soft leaves he had gathered. Ethan tried to communicate, pointing to the water, the food, and miming sleep. Slowly, she seemed to understand. Night fell, and the sky above was unlike anything Ethan had ever seen. Twin moons cast silver light over the landscape, and the mist shimmered with strange colors. For a moment, the alien planet felt beautiful despite its dangers. The girl looked up at the sky, her large eyes reflecting wonder. Ethan smiled softly. "You're safe here tonight," he said. "I'll keep watch." He set up a small fire at the cave entrance. The warmth chased away the chill, and he could see her eyes relax slightly. Despite the language barrier, something unspoken passed between them. A sense of trust, a fragile bond born of survival. Suddenly, he heard movement outside the cave. He tensed, ready for danger. But it was only a small animal darting into the shadows. Ethan exhaled, his shoulders relaxing. Protecting her was exhausting work, but he wouldn't stop. Not now. As the fire flickered, Ethan thought about the days ahead. The storm had damaged his ship, and he had no way to call for help. Yet he wasn't alone anymore. The girl's presence gave him purpose, a reason to keep going. Somehow, he had to get them both out of this wilderness safely. Hours later, Ethan finally allowed himself to sleep, sitting near the girl to ensure she was safe. The fire crackled and the strange alien sounds of the forest surrounded them. When he awoke, the girl was gone. Panic surged through him at first. He called out, his voice echoing into the mist. But then he noticed faint footprints leading deeper into the forest. She hadn't left him behind. She had walked carefully, seemingly wanting to lead him somewhere. Ethan followed, unsure of what awaited him. Every step was cautious, every shadow potentially hiding danger. Yet he trusted her instinctively. She had survived this far, and perhaps she knew more about this planet than he did. Hours passed, and they reached a small clearing with a stream. The girl stopped and looked back at him, her eyes urging him to wait. Then, with a surprising display of strength and agility, she darted into the underbrush. Ethan watched, heart pounding. He wanted to call her back, but he hesitated. Something told him this was part of her world, and he needed to respect that. As night fell again, Ethan made camp near the stream. He was tired, cold, and hungry, but a strange sense of hope filled him. Somehow the small alien girl had changed everything. His mission was no longer about survival alone. It was about protecting someone else, someone who had trusted him completely. And somewhere in the darkness, he knew that this was only the beginning. The planet was full of dangers, and she was only one small part of a much larger story waiting to unfold. But for the first time since the crash, Ethan felt ready, because he was no longer just a human stranded on an alien world. He was a protector. The next morning, Ethan woke to the sound of movement in the trees. Birds, or something like birds, flitted through the branches, their wings catching the light from the twin moons still faintly visible in the sky. He rubbed his eyes, still groggy from the previous night's exhaustion, and noticed the small alien girl sitting by the stream. She was washing her wounds carefully, humming a quiet, soft sound that echoed strangely in the forest. Ethan had no idea what she was saying, but he could feel her calm. Her luminescent patterns pulsed faintly as she worked, almost as if they were breathing with her. He watched silently, not wanting to disturb her. After a few moments, she glanced up, her large eyes meeting his. There was a spark of recognition and something like relief. Suddenly, Ethan froze. Movement in the forest around them became more noticeable. Shadows shifted between the thick, twisting trees. Then a rustle of leaves announced their presence clearly. Figures were approaching. Ethan stood slowly, positioning himself between the girl and the forest, unsure of what he might face. From the trees emerged a group of women. Tall, graceful, and strong, their skin carried the same faint luminescent markings as the girl. They wore garments woven from plant fibers and adorned with strange glowing stones. Their eyes were alert, scanning the clearing with a mixture of curiosity and caution. Ethan's heart pounded. These were clearly members of the girl's species, but more mature, more powerful, and armed. Each carried a weapon of a strange design, long curved spears and blades that shimmered faintly. Ethan raised his hands, showing he meant no harm. The girl stepped forward, moving between Ethan and the approaching women. She made soft sounds, pointing at him, then at herself, then gesturing toward the forest. The women paused, exchanging words in a language Ethan could not understand. Their voices were melodic but sharp, filled with meaning he could not grasp. Ethan swallowed hard, trying to convey his intentions without words. "I saved her," he said simply. "I only want to help." One of the women, taller than the rest, stepped forward. Her markings were brighter, and she carried herself with a commanding presence. She spoke, her voice firm, and the others fell silent, listening. Ethan couldn't understand the words, but the tone was clear. She was questioning him. The young alien girl spoke again, pointing to Ethan's chest, then to herself, and finally gesturing at the injuries he had treated. Ethan realized she was explaining what had happened. The tall woman's expression softened slightly, though her eyes remained wary. She gestured for the others to lower their weapons, but only a little. Ethan took a cautious step forward. "I mean no harm," he repeated, his voice steady but respectful. He had no idea if they could understand him, but he hoped his tone conveyed sincerity. The tall woman studied him, then the girl, then Ethan again. Finally, she nodded once. A soft sound passed through the group, almost like a collective breath. They lowered their spears fully and began moving closer. The tension in the air lessened, but Ethan remained cautious. The girl smiled at him, then gestured for him to follow. Ethan glanced at the group of women. They watched him carefully but did not block his path. He took a deep breath and walked after the girl. The forest seemed even more alive now, with creatures moving in the shadows and strange glowing plants illuminating their path. They walked for hours, the terrain becoming more rugged. Ethan stumbled over rocks and roots, but the girl guided him carefully, often looking back to make sure he was keeping up. Finally, they reached a large clearing where the group of women stopped. In the center was a small village made of woven plant structures, glowing faintly with bioluminescent lights. The women moved with purpose, guiding Ethan and the girl to the village center. The tall woman addressed Ethan again, speaking quickly to the others. They circled him, their eyes studying him closely. Ethan tried to remain calm, aware that any wrong move could be seen as aggression. He nodded respectfully, and the women seemed to recognize the gesture. Finally, the girl took his hand and led him into a small dwelling. Inside, the air was warmer and filled with the smell of herbs and cooking fires. Ethan set the girl down on a soft mat, and she smiled at him again. He noticed that the women outside were still observing, standing in formation around the village, their spears ready but relaxed. Ethan had questions, but he decided to start with small gestures. He pointed to himself and said, "Ethan." Then he pointed to the girl. She repeated his name with a soft, lilting sound, and Ethan realized she had understood him. He pointed to the tall woman. "Leader?" he asked tentatively. She nodded, confirming his guess. The village was alive with activity. Other women emerged from their homes, curious and cautious. Ethan noticed that they were all similarly marked, their skin glowing faintly in the dim light. Some carried tools or food, while others tended to small alien animals. There was a sense of community, of balance between them and the strange world around them. One of the women brought water and food for Ethan, setting it gently on the floor. He knelt to accept it, grateful. The girl watched him, eyes wide, then mimicked him in drinking and eating. Ethan smiled. It was a small victory, but it felt significant. Later, outside the dwelling, the tall woman gestured for Ethan to follow her. She led him to a small clearing where the village elders had gathered. They were older, their markings more intricate and luminous. They spoke in low tones to each other, then turned their attention to Ethan. The girl stepped forward, pointing at him again, then gesturing toward her own injuries and the care he had provided. Ethan realized she was telling the story of what had happened days ago, the day he had rescued her from the wreckage. The elders listened, their expressions serious. Finally, the tall woman addressed Ethan directly. She spoke slowly this time, using gestures to help him understand. "You saved her," she said, her voice clear with a tone of both question and acknowledgement. Ethan nodded. "I saved her," he repeated. "I only want to help. I don't want to fight." The woman considered his words, then nodded once. The other women and elders relaxed slightly, though their eyes remained watchful. They spoke among themselves for a few moments, then gestured for Ethan to stay in the village for the night. That evening, as the twin moons rose over the forest, Ethan sat by the fire in the village center. The young alien girl sat beside him, her eyes reflecting the flames. The women of the tribe moved around them, carrying food, tending to small fires, and watching for threats. Ethan realized that this was more than just a temporary refuge. He had been accepted cautiously into a world far different from anything he had known. He asked the girl questions with gestures, pointing at objects and miming actions. She responded in kind, showing him the ways of her world. She pointed to the glowing plants, the small animals, and even the different paths in the forest. Ethan listened carefully, trying to learn as much as he could. As night deepened, he felt a sense of awe. He had come to this planet alone, expecting danger and isolation. Instead, he had found someone in need and, through his actions, had earned the cautious trust of an entire tribe. The responsibility was heavy, but it was also exhilarating. Ethan lay down on a mat provided by the tribe, the girl curling beside him in a gesture of trust. Outside, the women maintained a silent watch, their presence reassuring. He knew the days ahead would be challenging. There would be questions to answer, tasks to complete, and dangers to face. But for the first time since crashing on this planet, Ethan felt that he was not alone. Somewhere deep in the forest, he sensed the mysteries of this world waiting to unfold. And he knew that the girl he had rescued was only the beginning, because tomorrow the tribe would test him. And he would need to prove that his intentions were true, not just for himself, but for the girl and the people who had come to trust him. Ethan awoke to the gentle glow of the alien forest. The twin moons cast soft silver light across the village, reflecting off the glowing markings of the women who were already moving about their morning tasks. Birds, or creatures like birds, sang in a melodic harmony, filling the air with sounds that were unfamiliar but soothing. The young alien girl was already awake, kneeling by the stream with her hands cupped to collect water. She glanced at Ethan and gestured for him to come closer. He did, kneeling beside her and following her silent instructions. She guided him through a morning routine he did not fully understand, washing wounds, checking supplies, and observing the environment for dangers. After the morning rituals, the tall woman who had first approached him the previous day appeared. She wore a ceremonial cloak adorned with glowing stones signaling her authority. Ethan stood as she approached, unsure of what she intended. The girl stood beside him, a quiet reassurance that he was not alone. The woman spoke slowly, using gestures and simple sounds that Ethan could partially interpret. She pointed at Ethan, then at the girl, then at herself. Finally, she made a sweeping motion toward the village and the surrounding forest. Ethan realized that she wanted him to understand the tribe would decide his fate. The village elders had gathered. Their markings were intricate, their eyes sharp with scrutiny. Each elder spoke softly to one another, the words rapid but melodic. Ethan could not understand them, but the tone conveyed a sense of serious deliberation. He noticed that the young girl had moved forward, placing a hand on her chest and pointing toward him. She was speaking on his behalf. Finally, the tall woman addressed him directly. She gestured for him to stay and mimed a motion that seemed like a question. Why had he helped the girl? Ethan thought carefully. I saw her in danger, he said slowly. She needed help. I could not leave her. The woman nodded, though her expression remained cautious. She spoke again, pointing to the forest and mimicking actions that Ethan interpreted as tests or trials. It became clear that the tribe wanted to determine whether he was truly trustworthy, not just through words, but through actions. The elders had a tradition of testing outsiders, ensuring that only those with courage and integrity could interact with the tribe's children and young members. Ethan understood that the trial was both a matter of safety and respect. He did not flinch. I understand, he said. I will do what is needed. The young alien girl stepped forward, her eyes bright with hope. She gestured at Ethan, then at herself, and finally at the forest beyond the village. The elders nodded, acknowledging her role in this decision. It was clear that she had influence even at her young age. The tall woman led Ethan to the edge of the forest. The terrain beyond was wild and untamed. Strange plants twisted toward the sky, their leaves glowing faintly in the moonlight. The ground was uneven, with hidden pits and rocks that could easily cause injury. Ethan's heart raced, but he remained calm. He had survived the storm. He could face this trial as well. You must travel through the forest, the woman said, using gestures to indicate obstacles, creatures, and dangers. Return with proof of courage and protection. Only then will you be trusted, Ethan nodded. I will do it. The girl stayed close, her presence comforting. She gestured at him as if reminding him that he was not alone. Then, with a flick of her hand, she pointed toward the forest, indicating the start of his journey. Ethan stepped carefully into the dense foliage. Every sound was amplified in the quiet of the morning. The snap of a twig, the rustle of leaves, the distant calls of alien creatures. He kept his senses alert, moving slowly but steadily. The tall woman and several tribe members followed from a distance, observing silently but making no attempt to interfere. Hours passed. Ethan encountered obstacles almost immediately. A stream blocked his path, its waters swift and cold. He looked for a crossing point and finally found a series of large stones that allowed him to step across without falling. Further ahead, thorny plants reached out like grasping fingers. He navigated carefully, avoiding injury while maintaining speed. Then a sound froze him in place. A large creature, unlike anything he had seen before, emerged from the shadows. Its body was covered in iridescent scales, and its eyes glowed with intelligence. It growled, a low rumbling sound that shook the ground. Ethan's first instinct was to run, but he remembered the tribe's purpose: courage and protection. He observed the creature. Its movements were deliberate and it seemed curious rather than immediately hostile. Ethan slowly reached into his pack and pulled out a piece of dried food. He extended it carefully, speaking softly, hoping to communicate peace. The creature sniffed, then cautiously took the food. Ethan exhaled quietly, relief washing over him. The first test of patience and understanding had passed. Further into the forest, he encountered more challenges. A fallen tree blocked a narrow path. Thorny vines tangled at his feet. Strange insects buzzed and swarmed around him. Yet he persisted, using his wits and patience instead of brute force. Every step tested his endurance, his observation, and his respect for the environment. Suddenly, a cry reached him from deeper in the forest. He ran toward the sound and found one of the tribe's warriors trapped under a fallen branch, her leg pinned. Her spear lay just out of reach and she struggled to free herself. Ethan's heart raced. This was unexpected, but he had to act. He dropped to the ground and began lifting the branch, grunting with effort. The warrior struggled to help but could not move it alone. Finally, with one last push, Ethan lifted the branch just enough for her to escape. She scrambled to her feet, her eyes wide with shock and gratitude. Ethan stepped back, catching his breath. "You are brave," she said, her voice melodic, though he could not understand the words fully. Her gestures were clear. She acknowledged his courage and selflessness. The girl he had rescued appeared, her eyes shining as she clapped her hands softly. She pointed at Ethan, then at the warrior, and finally at herself. She was telling the tribe that he had saved one of their own. When they returned to the village, the elders gathered once more. Ethan stood before them, exhausted but proud. The tall woman spoke, her gestures filled with meaning. She pointed at Ethan, then at the girl, then at the warrior he had saved. The elders murmured among themselves. It was clear that his actions had spoken louder than any words. The girl stepped forward, placing a hand on Ethan's shoulder. Her eyes met his, and he felt a deep sense of connection. She had trusted him completely, and he had honored that trust. The elders nodded one by one, acknowledging his courage and integrity. Finally, the tall woman approached Ethan. She placed a hand on his shoulder and nodded solemnly. Through gestures, she indicated that he had passed the trial. The girl hugged him briefly, her small arms wrapping around him with a strength that surprised him. Ethan smiled, feeling a sense of relief and accomplishment. That night, as the village settled under the twin moons, Ethan reflected on the day's events. The trial had been dangerous, yes, but it had also been a revelation. He had learned to observe, to respect, and to act with courage and thoughtfulness. He had earned the trust of a tribe that had once viewed him as an outsider. The young alien girl curled beside him again, her presence comforting and reassuring. Ethan realized that he was no longer just a human lost on a strange planet. He had become a part of something larger, a bridge between worlds. The tribe had accepted him, but more importantly, he had proven to himself that he could rise to challenges he had never imagined facing. And deep in the forest, shadows moved and watched. Ethan knew that more trials and adventures lay ahead, but for now he allowed himself to rest, knowing that courage, kindness, and trust had brought him this far, because tomorrow he would continue to learn, not just about survival, but about the bonds that connected humans and aliens alike, and he would do it alongside the girl he had saved, and the tribe that had begun to see him not as an outsider, but as a protector and friend. Ethan awoke before dawn. The twin moons had already begun to fade, leaving pale light across the village. The air smelled fresh, damp with morning dew and the faint scent of glowing flowers. The young alien girl was already awake, moving silently through the camp. She turned to him, her large eyes glowing faintly, and gestured toward the forest. Today, Ethan realized, the tribe would observe the final part of his trial. The tall woman approached, her ceremonial cloak moving like liquid in the morning light. She gestured for him to follow, and Ethan obeyed. The village elders watched silently, seated in their woven structures, their glowing markings reflecting the early light. The girl walked beside him, guiding him to the edge of the forest. "You must go further," the tall woman said, her gestures firm but calm. She indicated that he would face creatures and obstacles that required both courage and intelligence. Ethan nodded. He felt ready. The previous day's trial had taught him patience and observation, but he knew the forest still held unknown dangers. He stepped into the dense trees. The undergrowth was thick and the ground uneven. Every sound echoed strangely. The rustle of leaves, the distant calls of creatures, and the snap of twigs underfoot. Ethan kept his senses alert, moving carefully but decisively. The young girl watched him for a few moments, then returned to the village. Ethan realized this final challenge was his alone. Hours passed, and Ethan encountered the first true test, a deep chasm with jagged rocks below. The only way across was a series of narrow ledges protruding from the walls. One misstep could mean injury or worse. He took a deep breath and began the careful climb. Each step required focus, balancing on the slick stone while avoiding loose debris. The wind gusted through the chasm, threatening to push him off balance, but he pressed forward steadily. Halfway across, a sudden screech echoed from the cliffs above. Ethan froze as a pair of large winged creatures descended toward him. Their feathers shimmered with a rainbow of colors, and their eyes glowed with intelligence. They circled, observing him carefully. Ethan held his ground, remembering the lessons from the previous day. He slowly extended his hands, palms open, and spoke softly. The creatures tilted their heads, assessing him. Ethan could feel their curiosity, but no aggression followed. After several tense moments, the creatures landed briefly on nearby ledges and observed him silently. Taking the opportunity, Ethan continued across the narrow path, moving with precision and care. Once he reached solid ground, he exhaled deeply, relief flooding through him. Further into the forest, he encountered a maze of thorny vines that blocked the path. The vines were thick and twisted, some glowing faintly. Ethan studied the maze, searching for a safe passage. He realized brute force would only injure him or alert the creatures that might be hiding nearby. Instead, he observed the pattern of the vines and found a narrow path that twisted safely through the maze. Step by step, he moved carefully, using small branches to push aside obstacles without harming the environment. Suddenly, a loud roar echoed through the forest. A massive creature emerged, a predator with sleek scales and powerful limbs, its eyes locked on Ethan. He froze, his mind racing. The creature advanced slowly, sniffing the air. Ethan remembered the warrior he had saved during the previous trial. This time he had to act quickly. He picked up a long branch and held it in front of him, trying to appear larger and less vulnerable. The predator paused, circling him. Ethan slowly backed toward a nearby tree, hoping to find shelter or a safer vantage point. He noticed a hollow in the tree, large enough to climb into, and scrambled up. The predator growled but did not follow. Ethan waited, breathing slowly until it finally wandered off. He climbed down carefully, heart pounding. Hours continued in a blur of obstacles and challenges. He crossed streams with swift currents, avoided strange glowing plants that released toxic spores, and navigated paths filled with hidden pits. Each obstacle tested not only his physical ability, but also his judgment and patience. He learned to move calmly, think quickly, and respect the forest's strange ecosystem. Midway through the day, a sudden cry reached him from a nearby ravine. Ethan ran toward the sound and found another tribe member trapped under a fallen tree, injured and unable to move. The woman's spear was just out of reach. Ethan didn't hesitate. He used all his strength to lift the tree, freeing her. She scrambled to her feet, grateful and amazed. The girl appeared beside him, pointing to the woman and then to Ethan, silently praising his courage and selflessness. Ethan continued the trial with renewed determination. The challenges grew harder, and the sun climbed high, casting strange shadows through the forest. He climbed rocky slopes, avoided venomous creatures, and even navigated a section filled with quicksand-like soil. Each time he used observation, patience, and intelligence instead of rushing. The forest tested him thoroughly, and he passed each test through careful thinking and courage. Finally, as the sun began to dip toward the horizon, Ethan reached the edge of a cliff overlooking a glowing valley. Bioluminescent plants painted the landscape in green and blue light, and a calm river wound through the valley floor. It was breathtaking, beautiful, alien, and alive. He realized this was the final point of the trial. He had faced physical danger, tested his judgment, and demonstrated his courage and respect for life. From the shadows, the tall woman and several other tribe members appeared. They had observed him throughout the day, watching his actions and decisions. Their expressions were unreadable at first, but slowly they softened. The young girl ran forward, her arms raised in joy. She hugged Ethan tightly, a silent celebration of his success. The tall woman approached, her glow brighter than before. She placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder and nodded solemnly. Through gestures, she indicated that he had passed the trial. The elders emerged from the village, each nodding in acknowledgement. Ethan felt a deep sense of pride but also humility. He had not acted for recognition or reward, only to protect and survive. That night the village celebrated. Fires were lit, and the women of the tribe moved gracefully among the homes, preparing food and sharing stories. Ethan sat beside the young girl, exhausted but exhilarated. He watched the glowing lights of the village dance across the forest floor and realized he had truly become a part of this world, at least for now. The tall woman came to him once more. She gestured at the girl and then at Ethan, communicating without words that he was now an honored guest and a trusted ally. Ethan understood. His actions had bridged the gap between two very different worlds. The girl had been saved, the tribe had been shown his true character, and he had learned the strength and value of courage, patience, and trust. As he lay down to sleep under the alien sky, Ethan felt a new sense of belonging. The forest around him was alive with strange sounds, glowing plants, and the faint presence of creatures he could not see. But he no longer felt fear. He had faced the trials, proven his courage, and earned trust. The young girl curled beside him once again, a symbol of connection and hope. Ethan realized that his journey was far from over. There would be more challenges, more lessons, and more dangers. But now he had allies, trust, and the knowledge that he could rise to meet whatever the alien world would throw at him. For the first time since his crash, he felt a sense of peace, an understanding that courage and kindness could create bonds even across worlds and species. And deep in the forest, the tribe watched silently, knowing that the human they had once doubted had proven himself worthy. Ethan had survived not just the physical dangers of the alien forest, but also the unspoken test of heart and character. He was no longer just a visitor. He was someone they could trust, and perhaps in time someone they could call family. Tomorrow, the real journey would continue. But for now, Ethan allowed himself to rest, surrounded by the gentle glow of the forest, the warmth of the fire, and the quiet companionship of the girl he had saved. Because sometimes, the greatest trials are not just about survival. They are about proving that courage, kindness, and trust can cross even the widest boundaries between worlds. The sun rose slowly over the alien forest, painting the sky in shades of violet and gold. Ethan stood at the edge of the village, taking in the serene beauty of the world that had once seemed so dangerous. The trees swayed gently in the morning breeze, their leaves glowing faintly as the twin moons faded completely. The young alien girl ran toward him, her laughter bright and melodic echoing through the clearing. "Good morning," Ethan said with a smile, though the girl could not understand his words exactly. She merely smiled back and held out her hand, guiding him toward the village center. Today was different. There were no tests, no trials he had passed. The tribe had accepted him. The tall woman approached, her expression calm but proud. She gestured toward the girl, then at Ethan, and finally pointed to the village. It was clear. He was now considered a trusted member, someone who could live among them and help protect their community. Ethan felt a deep sense of relief and joy. For the first time since his crash, he felt truly at home. The young girl stayed close, her small hands sometimes brushing against his as they walked. It was a silent bond formed through courage, patience, and trust. Ethan realized that saving her had led to something far greater than he could have imagined, a new family and a new life. The village welcomed him with quiet celebration. Women who had once observed him cautiously now approached with gentle smiles, offering food and gifts. Some showed him the ways of their world, how to gather glowing fruits from the forest, how to navigate the stream safely, and even how to care for the small, luminescent animals that roamed freely among the trees. Ethan learned quickly, guided by the young girl and the tribe. He discovered which plants were safe to eat, which streams provided clean water, and how to read the subtle signs of the forest's many creatures. Every day was a lesson. Every interaction an opportunity to understand a world so different from his own. The girl often led him to the forest's edge, pointing out landmarks, secret paths, and hidden places she had discovered. Her energy and curiosity were contagious, and Ethan found himself laughing more than he had in months. He realized that the bond they shared was not just about trust or survival. It was friendship, genuine and deep. One afternoon, as Ethan helped the tribe repair a damaged dwelling, a group of women approached him. Their markings glowed faintly in the sunlight, and their eyes held a mix of curiosity and respect. The tall woman stood with them, nodding toward Ethan and the young girl. Through gestures, she explained that they wanted him to be part of a ceremony, a rite of acceptance that would officially make him a member of their tribe. Ethan's heart raced. He had not expected this, but he understood its importance. It was not just an honor. It was a commitment. Accepting it meant he would live among them fully, share in their daily lives, and protect them as he had promised the young girl he would. The ceremony was simple but beautiful. The tribe gathered in a large clearing, the bioluminescent plants glowing around them. The elders took their places at the center, and the young girl stood beside Ethan, her hands gently touching his arm. The tall woman approached him carrying a small glowing crystal. She placed it in his hands, its warmth spreading through him. This symbol, she gestured, means trust, courage, and protection. You have earned it. Ethan nodded, feeling the weight and honor of the moment. He looked at the young girl, who smiled brightly, and then at the tribe, who watched him with respect and acceptance. The ceremony concluded with the tribe forming a circle around him. Ethan felt a deep connection to these people, these women, and the forest itself. He had arrived on this planet as a stranger, a lone human unsure of survival. Now he was part of something greater, a community bound by trust and mutual respect. In the days that followed, Ethan's life settled into a rhythm. He woke with the sun, helped gather food, and learned more about the forest. The young girl was always nearby, teaching him, laughing and sharing her world with him. He discovered hidden groves, sparkling waterfalls, and creatures that seemed almost magical in their behavior. One evening, as the sky turned deep purple and the first stars appeared, Ethan sat by the stream with the girl. She pointed to the water, then to herself, then at him as if asking if he understood. He nodded, smiling. She giggled and splashed water gently toward him. Ethan laughed, realizing that he had found joy in this alien world, something he had not expected when he first crashed on the planet. The tribe's trust in him deepened over time. They allowed him to take part in planning, hunting, and protecting the village. His knowledge of human survival techniques, combined with their understanding of the forest, made them an effective team. Danger still existed, but together they were stronger. Ethan often thought back to the moment he had found the young girl, trapped and frightened. That single act of courage had changed everything. He had come to this planet expecting loneliness and struggle, but instead he had discovered friendship, trust, and a place where he truly belonged. The young girl became his constant companion, showing him new areas of the forest and introducing him to her friends among the tribe. She laughed easily, spoke in gestures, and shared her unique perspective on the world. Ethan learned to communicate more effectively with her, using signs, expressions, and simple sounds. Their bond grew stronger with each passing day. One morning, the tall woman approached Ethan with a serious expression. She gestured for him to follow her into the forest. Curious, he complied. She led him to a hidden grove, a place the tribe used for meditation and reflection. She gestured for him to sit, and then placed a hand on his shoulder. Through gestures, she communicated something profound. He was no longer just a visitor. He was part of the tribe's future. Ethan nodded, understanding the honor and responsibility. The young girl ran forward, placing her small hand in his. He felt a warmth of connection that went beyond words, a promise to protect, to care, and to remain part of this world. As weeks turned into months, Ethan's skills grew. He could navigate the forest with ease, understand the subtle warnings of creatures, and help maintain the village. The tribe treated him not as an outsider, but as a valued member. The young girl often led him to places of beauty and wonder, sharing secrets of the forest that few humans could ever imagine. One evening, as the twin moons rose again in the sky, Ethan and the girl sat atop a cliff overlooking the village. The lights of the dwellings glowed softly and the forest hummed with life. Ethan looked at the girl and smiled. She had grown more confident, more joyful, and her trust in him had never wavered. "I saved you," he said softly, though she might not understand the words. She tilted her head, her large eyes bright. In that moment, no words were needed. Their bond, forged through courage, trust, and shared experience, spoke for itself. Ethan realized that his life had changed forever. What had begun as a crash on a hostile alien world had become a journey of trust, courage, and friendship. The girl he had rescued had led him to a community that accepted him, taught him, and valued him. He was no longer just a survivor, he was a protector, a friend, and a part of something larger than himself. As the moons rose higher, casting silver light across the valley, Ethan knew that he had found his new home. The forest, the tribe, and the young girl were now inseparable parts of his life. He had come as a stranger, but he would remain as family. Because sometimes survival is not just about staying alive. It is about finding connection, trust, and a place where you truly belong. And on this alien world, Ethan had found all of that, and more. He looked at the young girl, who laughed and pointed at the stars, and realized that the journey that had begun with a rescue had led to something far greater. A life filled with trust, courage, friendship, and a home among the stars. And for the first time since the crash, Ethan felt completely, undeniably at peace.